How are you? Are you facing problems with the passive voice too? So, don't miss watching this video. Let's start now with the first example. This is a picture of Tony. Tony is a student. Can you guess what was he doing last night? That's good. Tony was doing his homework last night. The sentence is in the active voice. What we need to do is to divide the sentence into different parts. Normally, in a sentence in the active voice, we can have 3 to 4 parts. The subject, the verb, the object, and sometimes the last part, I call it here the rest of the sentence. In this sentence, we have 4 parts. Part number 1 is Tony, and it is the subject of the sentence. Part number 2 is was doing, and here we have 2 elements, was, and it is the auxiliary, and doing is the main verb, to do, doing. Part number 3 is his homework, and it is the object of the sentence. And finally, part number 4 is last night, and it is the rest of the sentence. So now we need to change the sentence from the active into the passive voice. The first thing that we need to do now is to change the order of the 4 parts we have in the sentence in the active voice. That is, number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. The subject, auxiliary, the main verb, object, and the rest of the sentence. So we make some kind of changes. So what we start with is part number 3, his homework, or better say the homework. Next is part number 2, done. This is the verb to do. It's the second element of part number 2, was doing. Okay, the main verb. As you can notice here, there is a change. We'll talk about this change later, don't worry. Next is part number 1, or Tony. And finally, part number 4, or last night. So the new sentence is the homework done Tony last night. Do you think that this is a correct sentence? Of course not. In fact, there are some missing words to make the sentence a correct one. The first part we need is was being. The homework was being done. And the second missing part is by Tony. So now the sentence, or the new sentence is the homework was being done by Tony last night. Now this is a correct sentence, okay? Now let's talk about the main changes that have occurred, okay? We talked about the change of the parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, we start by 3, 2, 1, and 4, and then we have some elements to add to the sentence to make it meaningful and correct. The first part is was being here, which is very important. Was being. As you can see, was being, it is not mentioned in the first sentence in the active voice. Was being. Here we have the main verb is to be. Was being is the form of the past continuous of the verb to be. Why the past continuous of the verb to be? There is a relationship between the tense of the verb to be here, which is the past continuous, and the tense of the main verb in the sentence in the active voice, which is was doing. Okay? This is also the past continuous because the main verb in the active voice is in the past continuous. To be must be in the past continuous. So in the passive voice, the verb to be always takes the form of the verb in the active voice. If the verb in the active voice is in the future simple, to be must be in the future simple too. If the verb in the active voice is in the present perfect continuous, to be must be in the present perfect continuous. So we don't have one form for the verb to be in the passive voice. This always depends on the form of the verb in the active voice. Now let's get back to the past continuous of the verb to be. There are two cases of the past continuous of the verb to be. Was being and were being. Was being, we use it with the subject pronouns I, he, she, and it. And were being with the subject pronouns we, you, and they. Now let's talk about the next main change in the sentence in the passive voice, which is done. Done, it's the verb to do. And why the verb to do? Here we take the second element of part number 2 in the active voice, which is the when. The main verb is the verb to do. This is the infinitive, okay? And we put this verb in the past participle. Why the past participle? You don't need to ask this question. This is simply the rule of the passive voice, which we are going to talk about at the end of the video, okay? To form the past participle, we need to know first the type of the verb we have. We have two types of the verbs. We have the regular and irregular verbs, okay? If the verb is regular, we add simply ed, d, or ied, and we're going to see some examples when we talk about the rule. And irregular verbs, there isn't a rule for that, but there is a list of verbs that we need to learn by heart, okay? Let's now move to the second example. Nora could write the report in a short time. This sentence again is in the active voice. And as I said before with the first example, we can have 3 to 4 parts in a sentence in the active voice. Here, again, we have 4 parts. Part number 1 is Nora, and it is the subject of the sentence. Part number 2 is could write. Here again we have 2 elements. Could, which is a modal, and write, which is the main verb. Okay? Then is part number 3, which is the report. It is the object of the sentence. And finally is part number 4, which is in a short time, and it is the rest of the sentence. Now we need to change the sentence from the active into the passive voice. The first important thing to do is to change the order of the 4 parts we have in the sentence of the active voice. The first part we can start with is number 3, which is the report. Then is part number 2, and we take the second element, which is the main verb. As you can see, there is a change in the form, write, written. We'll talk about this change again. Then is part number 1, Nora. And finally, part number 4, in a short time. The sentence is the report written Nora in a short time. The sentence isn't correct. To make it correct, we need to add some words. Can you guess the first words to add? The report, great, could be written. The report could be written by Nora in a short time. Now the sentence is correct. So let's talk now about the other changes that we have in the new sentence, in the passive voice. The first part to talk about is could be. Could be. Could, as we said before, it is the modal. Modal plus be. As you see here, be, it is bare infinitive. Why the modal plus be and bare infinitive? It is simply because part number 2 in the active voice includes the modal plus the verb in bare infinitive. Could write. Could is the modal and write is the main verb and bare infinitive. So, according to the passive voice, we need to use the modal and to be in bare infinitive. The report could be. Then the second part is written. Written here, it's the past participle of the verb write. The verb write is the second element that we have in part number 2 in the sentence in the active voice. To remind you, to form the past participle, we need to know first the type of the verb. If it is regular verb, we add ed, d, or ied. But if the verb is irregular, we need to learn by heart a list. Okay? Now, let's talk briefly about the rule of the passive voice. The first thing to do is to divide the sentence, which is in the active voice, into 3 or 4 parts. This depends, of course, on the sentence we have. The first part is the subject. The second part is the verb. And sometimes here in part number 2, we can have 2 elements. The first element includes the auxiliary or the modal, and element number 2 is the main verb. This is the case we have dealt with in this video, with example number 1, was doing. Was is the auxiliary and doing is the main verb. And example number 2, could write. Could is the modal and write is the main verb. Next is part number 3, which is the object of the sentence. And finally part number 4, which is the rest of the sentence. Now we need to change the sentence from the active into the passive voice. In doing so, we make some changes. The first thing is to start with part number 3 in the active voice. And there is something very important to pay attention to as far as this part is concerned. If you have an object pronoun in part number 3 in the sentence of the active voice, you need to change it into a subject pronoun. For example, if you have the object pronoun me, you need to change it into I, because we cannot start a sentence with me, but we say I. If you have you, then there is no change. If you have him, you change it into he. If you have the object pronoun her, change it into she. If the object pronoun is it, then there is no change. If the object pronoun is us, change it into we. And finally, if the object pronoun is them, change it into they. Now, let's look at an example. The sentence in the active voice is, David invited me to the wedding 2 weeks ago. When dividing the sentence, we're going to see that part number 3 is me. So according to the rule of the passive voice, we need to start with part number 3. Can we say, me was invited by David to the wedding 2 weeks ago? In fact, this isn't correct. We can't start a sentence with me, because me is an object pronoun. So what we need to do is to change it into a subject pronoun, which is I. So the correct sentence now becomes, I was invited by David to the wedding 2 weeks ago. Now let's finish the rule of the passive voice. So after part number 3, we need to use the verb to be, which is very important too in the passive voice. The verb to be doesn't have one form. It changes depending on the tense or form of the main verb in part number 2 in the sentence in the active voice. For example, if the sentence in the active voice includes the verb in the present continuous, then to be must be in the present continuous. If part number 2 in the sentence in the active voice is in the past perfect simple, then to be must be in the past perfect simple. So to be depends on the form or tense of the main verb in the active voice. Next is part number 2, and here we take just the element of the verb or the main verb and not the auxiliary or the modal. Okay? The main verb, according to the rule of the passive voice, must be in the past participle. And again, to form the past participle, we need to be aware of the type of the verb. When dealing with regular verbs, we add ed, as in the example of finish, finished, or d, as for the example prepare, prepared, or sometimes ied, as for the example deny, denied. If the verb is irregular, then we should learn by heart the list of irregular verbs so that we give the correct form of the main verb in the past participle. And here are 2 examples. For the verb do, the past participle is done, and for the verb take, it is taken. Next is the word by. By plus part number 1. And sometimes by plus part number 1 is not that important to mention in a sentence of the passive voice. But it is important to mention that when you use by plus part number 1, please, you need to pay attention to the following. If number 1 is a subject pronoun, there are some important things or changes you need to make. For example, if you have I, we can say by I, but we say by me. If we have she, we cannot say by she, but we say by her. Let's look at all the subject pronouns we have in English and the changes that can happen to them. I, as we said, it becomes me, so we say by me, not by I. The subject pronoun you, It doesn't change. It is the same like object pronoun, you, by you. The subject pronoun, he, we change it into him. We say by him. She, it becomes her, by her. It, there's no change, so we say by it. We change it into us, we say by us. And finally, they, we change it into them and we say by them. If we don't have subject pronouns, we keep the words as they are. For example, if we have part number 1 in the active voice is a name, like Jane, so we say by Jane, okay? The last part in the rule of the passive voice is part number 4, or the rest of the sentence. And to remind you again, we can have a sentence in the active voice with just 3 parts. That is to say, we have only the part of the subject, the part of the verb, and the part of the object. And sometimes we can have also an additional part, which is part number 4, which we'll call here the rest of the sentence. We hope that you have understood the content of this video. Please make sure that you refer to the first part of the lesson of the passive voice to help you understand this lesson very well. If you still have any problems with this lesson, please don't hesitate to write to us. We will be glad to answer all your questions. And if you find that this video is interesting, please make sure that you share it with others so that they learn from it too. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if this is your first visit, and activate the bell icon to get notified of our latest updates. Thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day.